The invitation lay on my kitchen table like a gilt-edged verdict. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the letterpress script in neat bands of shadow as the kettle clicked off behind me. I ran a finger over the gold foil of my sister's name, Melissa Harrington to be, and felt the paper bite back thick and expensive, the kind of card that holds its shape even when the room doesn't. The ribbon smelled faintly of starch and something floral from the boutique. Beyond the window, a gray Portland sky pressed low heavy with rain, and I could hear our neighbors' wind chimes worrying the air. Somewhere down the hall, our old clock ticked in measured beats, steady as a pulse. I turned the small insert over once, then again, as if a second look might change the words that were already changing everything. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments, and if you've ever had to guard someone's dignity when it wasn't popular. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who'll understand, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next chapter. To understand why that little card nearly stopped time, you need to know the house it came from and the rules that ran it long before I learned how to break one. I grew up in Lake Oswego, where hedges are trimmed to the inch, and the word appropriate can end most arguments. My parents' Tudor-style home had an oak table polished thin by decades of dinner parties and a dining room that smelled of lemon oil and restraint. My father, Robert, built a law practice that taught him to count wins and losses even at home. My mother, Eleanor, arranged charity galas on pen and ink calendars, moving people through rooms like chess pieces, each landing exactly where it looked best. Melissa fit there the way a hand fits a glove. She learned the names that matter, the places to be seen, the stories without sharp edges. I was the daughter who asked hard questions, the one who chose a school counselor's office over a corner, one who preferred eye contact to first impressions. I know the rhythm of crisis and the smell of cafeteria coffee, and I believe a door held open for a teenager counts as a kind of prayer. Years ago, that belief is what led me to Zoe, a quiet 11-year-old with curls she tried to tame and a gaze that measured rooms for exits. She came home with me carrying only a backpack and 100 reasons to doubt. We learned each other the way some people learn a new language slowly, with laughter in the wrong places and apologies that tasted like salt. We built a life that looked nothing like my parents' Christmas cards, but felt more like family than any photograph I've ever held. So, when the invitation to Melissa's Sun River wedding arrived, I set it down gently, almost reverently. I read the script and the schedule and the polite instructions about dress and weather and valet parking. Then tucked behind the RSVP, I found the insert, the one that said adults only, and in its silence named the person it meant to erase. At first, I gave Grace the benefit of doubt. Lots of formal weddings keep children home. But when I called my cousin Rachel to ask about her 17-year-old, she laughed, said Tyler had already ironed his shirt. An aunt mentioned both her 15-year-old twins had received their own envelopes addressed in the same careful hand. I hung up and stood at the sink with the water running, watching the steam fog the window while my mind did the arithmetic no one would say out loud. The math was exacting. Adults only somehow meant everyone's teenagers except mine. I called Melissa. She answered on the second ring with that bright tone she uses when a conversation is headed somewhere she'd rather not go. When I asked about Zoe, she said 16 was too young for the atmosphere. I reminded her of Tyler, of the twins, of the quiet way Zoe could cross a room without knocking anything over. Melissa sighed into the phone, the sound a polished stone dropping into shallow water. "They're different," she said. "They're family." I felt my hand go still on the counter. "So is Zoe," I said. "She is your niece." There was a beat of silence, long enough to tell me we had left the script. Melissa lowered her voice. "James's parents are traditional constants. They're paying for half of everything, and there will be judges there. They just—" She trailed off. Then she said the word I knew was waiting. Background. The way she said it fell into the room like ash. My daughter's life, its first 7 years of chaos and courage reduced to a stain you pretend you don't see on a white dress. In that moment, I could hear my father's voice behind hers, clinical and reasonable. It's one day. Be sensible. My mother's in the next breath, soft and tidy. Don't make this about you. I don't remember ending the call, only that the kitchen was very quiet after. The kettle had cooled. The invitation shone on the table like a mirror catching light that wasn't meant for us. I stood there long enough for the window to clear and show me my own reflection, a woman with paper in her hands and a choice on her face. Michael came in from the rain with a gust of air and the smell of wet wool. He set the grocery bag down and read me in one glance the way only people who stay can. I handed him the insert without speaking. He read, jaw working once, then looked up. What do we tell her? He asked. That was the only question that mattered. Not what we tell my parents who have never needed my explanations. Not what we tell Melissa, who has always preferred tidiness to truth. What do we tell Zoe, who has spent years learning how to believe forever could mean us? I could have gone and left Zoe with a friend for the weekend, the way my mother would later suggest. I could have called it adult business and told myself it was just a single door closing, not the whole hallway. I could have pretended it didn't hurt that the family who hung my childhood ribbons in a neat shadow box had decided to hang a sign on my daughter that said not appropriate. There are a dozen easy ways to smooth an ugly thing, so people at a table can eat without losing their appetite. But I've spent too many afternoons watching teenagers fold themselves into smaller selves just to fit someone else's plate. The front door opened and shut quick. Zoe dropped her backpack on the bench like she always does, and the house shifted around her. She was still in her debate sweatshirt, sleeves pushed to her elbows, curls damp from the mist. She eyed the invitation with practiced nonchalance, then looked at me with something unreadable the way she sometimes looks at tricky judges. The dress code says black tie, she said with a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Think they'd let me wear my Converse under a floor length? I wanted to tell her the truth wrapped in velvet. I wanted to say the word adults only and make it mean nothing. Instead, I brought her a mug of tea and told her the story straight, letting each word land. She listened without interrupting, her fingers wrapped around the heat, her jaw set. When I finished, she stared at the steam for a long time. Then she nodded as if something inside her had simply confirmed what it already knew. It's fine, she said. You should go. The way she said it too, even too practiced, sent a clean slice through the room. She meant it to free me. It did the opposite. I sat beside her and touched my shoulder to hers. Enough weight to say I was here, and here I would stay. No, I said softly, but as if I were setting a book on a shelf where it belonged. We don't go where you're not wanted. She didn't cry. She rarely does. She put her mug down carefully and gave a small, tight nod, the kind you give a judge when the clock runs out. I knew that look. It's the face you wear when a door shuts exactly the way you expected, and you still feel the wind. I called Melissa that night while the porch light made a pale pool on the wet steps, and the rain threaded down the glass in clear lines. I kept my voice even steady enough to feel like a handrail. I told her we would not be attending. At first, she didn't understand, then she did, and anger sharpened the edges of her words. She accused, then pleaded, then circled back to accusation with a new varnish. I let her finish. I said I loved her and that I wouldn't stand next to a rule that told my daughter she was a footnote. The silence that followed felt like stepping into a church after the service, the air still ringing with what had been said. The next morning, my phone began to fill with polite alarms. My mother's text arrived at dawn in full sentences, as if grammar might rescue grace. We should be able to resolve this. Don't make a scene. My father called on his way to court and explained the cost of my decision in terms of relationships legacy optics. An aunt left a voice message that sounded like a hymn sung off key. I put the phone face down and made pancakes while Zoe measured blueberries with the serious concentration she applies to everything that matters. We ate at the counter with our forks held in our hands like promises. All that week, rain braided itself across our windows, and the house kept its own counsel. In the evenings, Michael and I stood shoulder to shoulder at the sink, while Zoe did her homework at the table pencil, moving headphones crooked around her neck so she could still hear us if we laughed. We didn't shout our decision. We let it sit in the rooms the way you let bread rise, trusting what's invisible to do its work. On Friday, a heavy cream envelope appeared in our mailbox the size of a photograph and the weight of an apology that never quite arrives. Inside were final wedding reminders scheduled to the minute and addressed only to me. I slid the insert back into its sleeve and held the invitation a moment longer than necessary, the way you hold a memory you're deciding whether to keep. Then I opened the drawer where we keep spare batteries and warranties and placed the envelope carefully beneath the stack. The house ticked on. The porch light snapped on at dusk. Across the street, our elderly neighbor set his garbage can at the curb and tipped his cap at Zoe as she came in from practice. She kicked her shoes off by the door and asked what we were doing next weekend. Her voice light but held tight hope, disguised as routine. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and looked at her, the girl who had learned how to ask, only for what she could stand not to get. "We're not going," I said as if I were saying the weather. But I was thinking, maybe the coast. Kites, chowder, bad motel coffee. The kind with the tiny creamers you love. She smiled without showing teeth. "That doesn't sound terrible," she said. Outside, the rain lightened to a mist, the kind that hangs in the air and turns streetlights into halos. Michael reached for my hand beneath the table as if he were checking a pulse. Somewhere in the house, my phone started to buzz again, long enough to tell me this wouldn't be the end of the conversation, just the first clean cut. I didn't pick up. I listened to the clock and the faint hum of our old refrigerator and the sound of my daughter flipping a page. Against the quiet, the decision sat with its own gravity, not loud, not dramatic, but final in the way a door is when it closes slowly and clicks. The invitation remained in the drawer, immaculate and unseen, the paper holding its shape, while ours began to change. And as the porch light blinked in the damp and our neighbor's wind chimes found a gentler rhythm, I understood this was the moment we would be measured by this simple refusal, this small mercy for a girl who had already learned too much about locked rooms. By Sunday night, the messages had multiplied, and the words had sharpened, polished into something they meant for me to accept. I carried my mug to the sink, turned off the lamp over the table, and stood a long time in the dark kitchen, listening to the rain on glass. Rain softened overnight into a thin, steady mist that clung to the windows by morning. The house smelled of coffee and damp cedar. I stood at the sink, watching the garden blur into gray, and tried not to think about the envelope hidden in the drawer. Michael's hand brushed my shoulder as he passed behind me, silent, but present the way he always was when words would only make things heavier. Zoe came down the hall, hair still damp from her shower, humming something under her breath. She looked rested, lighter somehow, as if our decision had already faded into the background. I envied her ability to move forward so quickly. "Do you want me to pack lunch or buy at school?" I asked. "Lunch," she said, tying her shoes by the door. "Leftover chowder's fine." Her calmness made my chest ache. The day before, she'd learned she was unwelcome in a room full of people who shared my last name, and now she was just living. The phone rang while she was zipping her coat. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. My mother's calls always came early before doubt could set in. I let it ring twice, then answered. Her voice was gentle, polished around each word. "Constance." I just don't want this to turn into something larger than it is. I closed my eyes and pictured her at the dining room table, coffee in her porcelain cup, pearls at her throat, even when no one was watching. It's already large, Mom, I said quietly. You just don't want to look at it. She sighed, long and theatrical. You've always been sensitive. Please don't punish your sister for trying to have a proper wedding. Zoe lifted her backpack. I'll be late, she mouthed. I nodded, blew her a kiss, and watched through the window as she crossed the street to meet the bus. My mother was still speaking when the bus pulled away. You could leave Zoe with friends for the weekend, she said. It's 3 days. Don't make this about yourself. Her tone softened at the edges, but the sentence landed sharp. I could feel that old reflex rise, the one that made me apologize just to keep peace, but I caught it before it escaped. Mom, I said this isn't about me. I hung up before she could say my name again. The house was quiet for a long time after that. I walked from room to room, straightening small things that didn't need straightening: the throw over the couch, the stack of books on the coffee table. Each motion was a way to steady my hands. Outside, the sky lightened, but never cleared. By afternoon, the mist turned back to drizzle, and the gutters hummed softly, like the sound of a memory repeating itself. Michael came home carrying takeout and 2 paper cups of tea. You okay? He asked. I nodded, though we both knew the answer was complicated. They'll move on to other things, he said. But she won't forget what you did for her. He didn't mean the argument or the calls. He meant the choice to stay beside her when the easier road led away. We ate quietly, the kind of silence that doesn't press, and by the time Zoe came home, the house felt warm again. That weekend, the wedding unfolded without us. I imagined the music, the silverware, the toasts given by people who believed they understood love. Instead, we drove west to the coast, windows down just enough to let the salt air in. The road curved through evergreens and opened to the sea like a sigh. Zoe sat in the back with her camera leaning toward the window to capture waves breaking against the rocks. It's colder than it looks, she said when we stopped at the beach. Her laughter carried across the wind. We built a sandcastle that didn't last an hour and bought chowder thick enough to eat with a fork. That night, we watched the sunset through the motel window, its light staining the walls gold. None of us mentioned the wedding. We didn't need to. The quiet between us said everything. When we came home on Sunday evening, my phone was full of missed calls. My father's number appeared first, then Melissa's, then a string of relatives whose names I hadn't seen in months. I let them sit. The house smelled faintly of sea salt and damp towels. Zoe unpacked her souvenirs, a smooth stone, a postcard of a lighthouse, and lined them on her dresser. Can we print the beach photos tomorrow? She asked. Of course, I said. Maybe we'll frame one. She smiled, small and sure, and for a moment I believed we had outrun the storm. But storms have a way of finding you. By Tuesday, my father called again. His voice came measured, the same tone he used with clients. Constance, your mother is upset. You've embarrassed the family. Melissa's wedding was supposed to be joyful. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear and stared out at the wet street. Embarrassed, I said, for protecting my daughter. There was a pause long enough to hear him exhale through his nose. You've made this about principle, he said, when it should be about family. I wanted to tell him they were the same thing, at least in a family worth belonging to. Instead, I said nothing, and the silence grew between us until he hung up first. The next few weeks blurred into gray days and long drives to work. At school, I listened to students untangle their small crises, friendships, college applications, hearts bruised by first love, and I thought how simple it seemed when pain had edges you could name. Mine didn't. It was a slow drip of absence. No calls from my mother, No texts from cousins, not even the usual family emails about upcoming birthdays. For the first time, I wasn't just ignored. I was erased. December arrived colder than usual. The city dressed itself in lights and wreaths, and stores played music too cheerful to escape. One afternoon, a card arrived from my mother, her handwriting neat as ever. We should talk before the holidays. Inside, she'd written an invitation to Christmas at my grandparents' estate in West Lynn. The words "We've missed you" stood out in looping ink, but there was no mention of Zoe's name, no apology, no acknowledgement of what had passed. I stared at it until the letters blurred. When I told Michael, he leaned against the counter and read the note twice. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Part of me wants to go," I admitted. "Not for them, for her. Maybe she deserves to see that we tried." He nodded thoughtful. "Then we'll set boundaries. If they can't treat her with respect, we leave." It was a simple promise, but the firmness in his voice steadied something inside me. That evening I showed the invitation to Zoe. She ran her thumb along the gold edge before setting it back on the table. "You really want to go?" she asked. Her tone wasn't defiant, just cautious. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe it's time to stop running from them." She thought for a long moment. "If we go, can we leave whenever we want?" "Anytime," I said. She smiled, faint but real. "Then okay." Over the next weeks, I prepared the way I always did when walking into a place that didn't quite want me. I planned, rehearsed, steadied myself with routine. I chose a green velvet dress for Zoe and a navy one for myself, both modest but elegant. I taught her the family's small rules, the order of greetings, the proper forks, how my mother preferred conversation to stay on safe topics. Zoe listened, amused. "Sounds like theater," she said. "In a way it is," I admitted. "But you don't have to act." The morning of Christmas frost glazed the garden, turning each blade of grass into glass. Zoe helped Michael load gifts into the car, careful with the ribbons. She looked grown in her dress, her curls gathered at the nape of her neck, silver earrings catching the light. "Are you sure?" she asked as we pulled onto the road. "We're sure," I said, though my palms were damp on the wheel. The drive took 45 minutes. The sky was pale and cold and the road shimmered with ice near the hills. Michael reached over once to squeeze my hand. Zoe watched the trees slide past, quiet but alert the way she did before a debate competition. When the estate gates appeared, black iron curling into the shape of vines, my heart beat harder than I expected. Beyond them, the old house rose from the fog, tall windows glowing gold against the gray. I parked beneath the same maple that used to drop its leaves over our childhood bikes. The air smelled of pine and something rich from the kitchen. As we walked up the steps, Zoe adjusted the ribbon on her coat, the small motion revealing how tense she was. Inside, the sound of conversation drifted from the foyer, layered with piano music. When I opened the door, every head turned. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother crossed the marble floor, smile practiced and bright. "Constance, darling," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "We were beginning to worry you'd changed your mind." Her gaze flicked to Michael, polite but cool, then to Zoe. "How nice you could join us, Zoe. The children are in the den." Her words hung like a gate half open. Before I could answer, my grandmother appeared behind her eyes, softer than I remembered. "There's my Constance," she said, taking my hand. Then she turned to Zoe and smiled a real smile. "And this must be our Zoe. You've grown." She linked arms with her and led her toward the living room before my mother could object. For a moment, relief loosened something in my chest. The house smelled of evergreen and roasted meat just as it always had. The tree reached nearly to the ceiling, dressed in silver and blue. Laughter rose from the next room, the kind that sounds effortless until you listen closer. Zoe stood beside my grandmother, answering a question I couldn't hear. Her posture was careful, but not small. Michael slipped his hand into mine. "She'll be fine," he whispered. I wanted to believe him. Dinner was served at 2 o'clock sharp. The table gleamed under the chandelier, 24 seats lined in symmetry. Place cards waited at each setting, the script flawless. Zoe's was missing. Someone had written her name on a plain white tag at the last minute, smaller than the rest. Her water glass wasn't crystal. Tiny differences easy to overlook but sharp once noticed. I caught Michael's glance. He'd seen them too. Zoe, to her credit, said nothing. She asked my grandmother about the cranberry relish and complimented the table, her voice steady. I saw pride and sorrow meet in my chest. Conversation fluttered around us. Business updates, holiday travel, Melissa's new house in Lake Oswego. No one mentioned the wedding. When dessert arrived, I caught my mother's eyes across the table. She looked tired but satisfied, as if normalcy had been restored. I smiled back, polite and unreadable. After dinner, gifts were brought into the living room. The tree lights blinked softly, reflecting in the glass ornaments. I excused myself for a moment, slipped down the hall, and opened the small bag I'd brought from home. Inside were the identical packages I'd wrapped weeks ago, square boxes tied in silver ribbon. Each one, the same weight, the same secret. I carried them back to the tree and set them among the others. My mother noticed but said nothing. The air in the room thickened with that particular kind of anticipation, the family waiting for its own performance to begin. I took my seat beside Zoe. She leaned close and whispered, "You sure about this?" I nodded once. My heartbeat was steady now, not from calm, but from certainty. My grandmother lifted one of the boxes first, reading the tag aloud. "From Constance," she said. "How mysterious." She smiled and motioned for the others to find theirs. One by one, they did, each person holding an identical silver parcel. "Let's open together," my grandfather said, always the efficiency expert. Paper rustled, ribbons fell, and the room filled with the quiet sound of discovery. When the lids came off, silence followed. Inside each box lay the same leather-bound album embossed with 2 words in gold, "Our Family." Pages turned, faces changed. The silence deepened. The fire crackled in the corner, steady and low. Outside, snow began to fall, fine as dust. I watched their eyes move from photographs of Easter brunches and 4th of July parties to new images they'd never seen: Zoe's debate award, our wedding in Forest Park Thanksgiving with Michael's parents, where love had no qualifiers. My grandmother's hand paused on a page, tracing the outline of Zoe's smile. The hush stretched long enough to feel like hours. Then Melissa's voice broke it, sharp as glass. "Are you serious right now?" she said. "You had a secret wedding." I looked at her and saw not anger, but fear of what truth looked like when laid beside performance. "Not secret," I said quietly. "Just private." Around the room, heads turned, the edges of old decorum beginning to fray. My father's jaw tightened. My mother clutched her pearls. The air felt electric, charged with all the things that had been unsaid for years. That was the moment, the breath, before everything changed, before the masks slipped, and the truth finally stepped into the light. Melissa's voice cracked through the silence like the snap of a branch underfoot. Her album lay open across her lap, the pages trembling with her movement. "You got married without us," she said. Her face flushed pink beneath her carefully applied makeup. The scent of cinnamon and pine from the Christmas tree couldn't disguise the sharpness in the air. I didn't raise my voice. It wasn't about shutting anyone out, I said. It was about starting our life with the people who see us clearly. My father's chair scraped against the hardwood as he stood, his expression fixed somewhere between disbelief and calculation. "So you replaced us with strangers," he said. The words were measured, but his tone carried a low vibration that made Zoe stiffen beside me. "No one's been replaced," I said quietly. "We simply made room for the people who actually showed up." My mother pressed a trembling hand to her pearls. "Constance," she whispered, "this is beyond inappropriate. On Christmas Day of all days." Across the room, my grandmother remained silent, slowly turning the pages of her album. When she finally looked up, her eyes found my mother's, sharp but calm. "Eleanor," she said softly, "have we ever truly made space for this child? Because I don't recall seeing her name on many invitations." The room went still again. The fireplace crackled, each pop of sap punctuating the quiet. Melissa rose suddenly, her voice rising. "You ambushed us," she said. "You wanted to embarrass me to get revenge for not bringing your charity case to my wedding." Zoe flinched. Michael moved closer to her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. I drew in a breath, slow and steady, because anger would only give Melissa what she wanted. "That's not what this is," I said. "You and I both know the truth, and it's been living in this family a lot longer than my marriage." My Aunt Patricia frowned and glanced at my mother. "Wait," she said. "We never got an invitation to your wedding. Did you send them?" I turned to my mother. "I sent them through, you remember? You said it would be simpler that way." She froze. Color drained from her face. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. I could almost hear the shift in the room, the sound of understanding settling, of facades slipping. My grandmother's voice was cool and precise. "Eleanor, did you withhold them?" My mother faltered. I thought it would confuse people," she said finally. "Two weddings so close together it would divide the family." "You mean you wanted to punish me?" I said, not unkindly, for standing beside my daughter when no one else did. The truth hung there, fragile and irrefutable. For a moment, even Melissa had no words. The only sound was the faint hum of the piano playlist still looping from someone's phone. Zoe sat very still. Her face was calm, but I saw the tension in her jaw, the way she pressed her palms against her knees to keep steady. She had been through worse than this room, but that didn't mean she deserved it again. My grandfather closed his album and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "It's remarkable," he said quietly, "how much honesty can fit in a few photographs." His eyes moved across the faces around him, his children, his grandchildren, his carefully kept legacy unraveling in real time. "Maybe we needed this." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father rubbed a hand across his face, already calculating damage control. I stood. "That's enough for tonight," I said, my voice soft but final. "You've seen the truth. What you do with it is your choice." I helped Zoe to her feet, handed her coat to her, and turned toward the door. My grandmother rose as well and crossed to me. She pressed something into my hand, a small silver frame from a side table. "For your real family portrait," she whispered. "I think I'd like to know my great-granddaughter better." Her words were a thread of light through everything heavy. Outside, the snow had thickened, turning the driveway white and soundless. Michael started the car, while Zoe climbed into the back seat, staring out the window. The glow from the house spilled onto the snow, like something that couldn't decide whether to warm or blind. As we pulled away, Zoe's voice broke the quiet. "That was kind of badass, Mom," she said, softly, a faint smile at the corner of her mouth, showing them what family really looks like. Michael laughed under his breath and reached back to squeeze her hand. "You get that from her," he said. I smiled, but didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, the snow swirling like static in the headlights. The tension from the evening was still lodged deep in my chest, but beneath it, something else had taken root. A calm I hadn't felt in years. When we got home, I set the silver frame on the mantel. The next morning, the messages started. Melissa's voicemail arrived first, her voice trembling with fury. "You ruined Christmas! You humiliated me in front of everyone! Don't bother calling until you're ready to apologize." My parents followed with their own version, a text from my mother, filled with disappointment and veiled threats about embarrassing the family, and a phone call from my father that began with the words, "That display yesterday was unacceptable." I let the voicemail play out, his voice clipped, his argument polished like a closing statement. "Constance, you've caused division," he said. "You owe your mother and sister an apology. We understand your commitment to Zoe, but ambushing everyone was cruel." Cruel. That word lingered long after the message ended. I replayed it once, then deleted it. The word belonged to people who had never stood outside in the cold for someone else. By afternoon, messages came from unexpected corners. My cousin Emma texted short and honest. "Those albums were brilliant. Made me see things I'd ignored." "Is Zoe okay?" Then Uncle Robert called, his tone tentative. "I've always thought the way your folks treated Zoe was off," he said. "Eleanor means well, but she's never understood that family isn't about pedigree. If it matters, I'd have come to your wedding." By the second day, the lines had been drawn. My parents and Melissa on one side defending the old order. My grandparents and a handful of others on the other, quietly acknowledging the truth. Zoe read a few of the messages over my shoulder. "It hurts," she said quietly. "But it feels good too. Like they finally saw it." She was right. The pain had purpose now. It wasn't just rejection. It was revelation. The days after Christmas were slow and strange. Snow lingered on the lawns, and the neighborhood stayed quiet. Michael returned to work, but I took time off. I needed space to think, to breathe. One afternoon, my grandparents called asking to meet for lunch at their club. I went alone, uncertain what awaited me. The dining room smelled faintly of citrus and wood polish, and the sound of clinking china filled the air. My grandmother didn't waste time. "I owe you an apology," she said as soon as I sat down. "I've not been the advocate for Zoe that I should have been." Her husband nodded beside her. "We were complicit," he said. "It's easier to stay silent, especially with your parents so set in their ways. But silence is its own kind of rejection." Their honesty left me still. My grandmother reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Did you know I was adopted?" she asked. I looked up, startled. "No," I said. "It was never spoken of," she said. "Closed adoption. Different time. Your grandfather's family worried about my unknown background. I suppose I should have recognized the pattern sooner." I felt something shift in me, then a kind of clarity that wasn't about blame, but inheritance, the things families pass down without meaning to. We talked for a long time about what came next. Before I left, my grandmother said she wanted to arrange a dinner, just us, my parents, Melissa, and her husband. "We can't heal by avoiding one another," she said. I agreed, though part of me already knew how difficult that evening would be. A week later, we gathered in a private room at the same club. The fire crackled softly, and the table was set with quiet elegance. My parents arrived first, looking strained but composed. Melissa came last, still carrying the brittle anger of the holiday. My grandfather began. "We're here because our family's been fractured. We need to decide whether we're willing to repair it." My father leaned back, arms crossed. "We've always considered Zoe part of the family," he said. "This has been blown out of proportion." My grandmother's gaze sharpened. "Then explain why she wasn't invited to Melissa's wedding," she said. Melissa's eyes flashed. "James's family had standards," she said. "They didn't want someone with that kind of background at a high-profile event." The words hung in the air like smoke. Zoe's hands tightened in her lap, but her voice when she spoke was steady. "What kind of background?" she asked. "The part where I was abandoned, or the part where I survived it?" Melissa looked down, caught between guilt and pride. "You know what I mean?" she muttered. "I do," Zoe said. "You mean I don't belong?" No one spoke. The air seemed to thin. My mother finally broke the silence. "Adoption is wonderful," she said softly, "but it's not the same as real family. There are differences." I felt Michael's hand brush mine under the table, grounding me. Years of careful diplomacy burned away in a heartbeat. "Do you hear yourselves?" I said quietly. "Do you realize how much harm those differences have done?" I listed them not as accusation, but as record. The gift cards when other grandchildren got presents, the introductions that always included the word adopted, the way no one called on birthdays or showed up to her events. Each example landed like a stone dropped into still water. By the time I finished, the room had gone very still. Zoe reached for my hand. My grandmother spoke next, her voice calm but firm. "Constance is right," she said. "This is a pattern, and it ends here." Melissa's jaw tightened. "So, we're supposed to pretend biology doesn't matter?" Zoe shook her head gently. "You don't have to pretend," she said. "Just treat me the same way you treat everyone else. If you can't, I'd rather not be included at all." Her words were simple, but they carried the kind of weight that changes a room. My father's eyes softened just enough to show the first hint of understanding. My mother's lips pressed together, but she said nothing. When we stood to leave, I turned to them all. "We love you," I said, "but we won't participate in a family that treats my daughter as less than. The choice is yours." Outside, the evening was cold and still. Snow glittered under the streetlights like frost on glass. We walked to the car in silence, our breath hanging in small clouds. Zoe slipped her arm through mine. "That was the last time I'll explain who I am," she said. Her voice was quiet, but sure. And I knew she was right. That night marked an ending, and maybe if we were lucky, the beginning of something better. Winter gave way slowly that year. The snow receded from the sidewalks in uneven patches, and every front yard seemed half asleep. For weeks, our house carried the kind of quiet that feels earned, steady routines, soft mornings, laughter that came easier than before. The air between us was lighter, but beneath it, I knew something had settled that wouldn't move again. The line had been drawn, and it was permanent. Zoe had stopped asking about family gatherings. She filled her time with debate practices, late-night essays, and a part-time job at the library where she organized story hours for younger kids. Michael and I kept our evenings simple: pasta on the stove, crossword puzzles, the occasional movie. It wasn't a new life so much as a truer one. My parents sent small gestures, careful and incomplete. Birthday cards without notes. Occasional text messages that read like business memos. I didn't reply often. Melissa's name stayed absent altogether. The silence no longer stung, but it echoed sometimes when the house was too still. By early February, the light began to change brighter, thinner, the kind that hints at spring, but still smells like frost. One afternoon, while grading papers in my office, I saw Zoe through the window, sitting on the porch steps, phone pressed to her ear. She was smiling, cautious, but genuine. When she came back in, she dropped her backpack by the door and said Emma called. I looked up, surprised. Your cousin, Emma? She nodded. She asked if we could meet for coffee, said she just wanted to talk. The meeting happened that weekend. They sat at a cafe downtown, and I waited 2 tables away pretending to read while keeping one eye on them through the crowd. Emma spoke softly, her hands moving as if to explain something she didn't yet have words for. Zoe listened, her face open, but guarded. When it was over, she returned with a paper cup half full and a kind of cautious light in her eyes. She didn't make excuses, she said. She just listened. That was how it started, the slow thaw that followed a long freeze. Within weeks, there were other messages. A picture of a new baby from a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. A call from Uncle Robert asking about Zoe's debate competition. Small gestures, tentative but real. Each one felt like a door opening just enough to let air in. In March, James reached out. The text was brief. Would you meet me for lunch alone? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet diner near downtown, the kind of place where waitresses called you hun and refilled your coffee without asking. James looked tired, his tie loosened, his smile uncertain. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. I owe you both an apology, he said, especially Zoe. He told me about his brother adopted when they were young, hidden from polite company once their parents realized how people whispered. I thought we'd outgrown that kind of thinking, he said. But I kept quiet when Melissa and my parents started talking about your daughter. I should have said something. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't realize silence was a choice too. When he finished, he asked if Zoe would be willing to meet him to hear it directly. I told him I'd ask. That evening, I relayed the message. Zoe sat on the couch, knees tucked to her chest, thinking for a long time. I'll listen, she said finally. But I won't make it easy for him. Their meeting happened at our kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window onto the pale wood. James arrived with a small bouquet of daisies and a tremor in his voice. Zoe let him talk. He didn't try to defend anyone, just spoke about the harm he'd ignored, the ways it had multiplied. I can't undo it, he said, but I want to be part of doing better. When he left, Zoe stood by the window, watching him walk to his car. He meant it, she said quietly. That's new. Melissa didn't come around. Months passed, and still her silence lingered. It was as if she lived in a house built entirely from pride, every window closed. My mother, though, began to show cracks in her armor. She'd call now and then, stilted conversations about recipes or weather that always seemed to teeter near apology, but never reached it. Once, she suggested lunch. Just the two of us. I agreed, though I warned myself not to expect much. We met at a cafe she liked near the river, the kind with white tablecloths and soft music. She arrived early, as always, her posture perfect, her smile tentative. For a while, we spoke about nothing at all. Then she set her teacup down and looked at me carefully. I was angry after Christmas, she said. I thought you were cruel to expose us like that. But then I went through that album again, really looked. I realized how much we've missed. Her voice wavered. She's remarkable, Constance. I wish I'd seen it sooner. It wasn't an apology, not completely, but it was more honesty than I'd ever heard from her. I nodded, unable to speak. The river shimmered outside the window, cold and clear, and for the first time in years, I believed there might be something left to rebuild. April brought color back to the world, cherry blossoms along the sidewalks, the smell of cut grass drifting through open windows. Zoe's 17th birthday approached, and Michael suggested we host a celebration in our backyard. Nothing big, just close friends, a few cousins, and maybe if they were ready, my parents. The idea made me nervous, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. A new beginning needed a place to start. We sent invitations to those who had reached out with genuine warmth. My grandparents accepted immediately. Emma and her husband replied within the hour. My parents hesitated for 2 days before calling to ask, "Would it be all right if we came?" I said yes, but with conditions: no grand speeches, no tension, no pretending. "This day is for her," I said. "If you come, it's to celebrate, not to repair." My mother agreed softly. "We understand." The afternoon of the party, the sky cleared after a week of rain. The grass still glistened in places, and the smell of spring was thick and clean. Michael hung string lights along the fence while Zoe and her friends arranged tables with wildflowers in mason jars. Laughter drifted through the yard as neighbors dropped by with trays of food. It felt simple, unforced, real. When my parents arrived, I saw the hesitation in their eyes, the discomfort of walking into a space where they were no longer the center. My grandmother greeted them first, pulling them into a hug that left no room for resistance. Then she turned to Zoe and handed her a small blue box. "This is late," she said, "but better late than never." Inside was a silver bracelet, delicate and shining with a heart charm that matched the ones given to every Bennett granddaughter on her 16th birthday. The tradition had skipped Zoe last year. Now, as my mother watched, the unspoken correction filled the air with something close to grace. Zoe blinked back tears as my grandmother fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "You're a Bennett?" she said softly. It's time everyone recognized that. The guests clapped small and genuine, and I saw my mother's hand move to her chest as though her heart had caught up to her eyes. Later, when the music played and the sun dipped behind the fence, I found her sitting alone on the porch swing, watching through the window as Zoe laughed with her friends. I sat beside her. "She's remarkable," she said again, her voice low. "I kept her at a distance because I thought it would protect the family." All it did was make me smaller. I looked at her, surprised by the honesty. "You can still make it right," I said. "She's willing to meet you where you are, as long as you come toward her." My mother nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I will." As the evening faded, my grandfather pulled me aside before leaving. "That album," he said, pressing my hand. "It was painful medicine, but necessary. You gave this family a mirror when it needed one." His words stayed with me long after the last guest left, echoing in the quiet house. Later, Michael poured 2 glasses of wine, and we sat on the back deck, watching Zoe open her gifts under the soft light of the string bulbs. The laughter rising from her friends mixed with the rustle of the wind. "You did good, you know," he said. "Whatever happens next, you gave her belonging." I looked at him and smiled. She gave it to all of us. Inside, the clock chimed softly. The house, once heavy with silence, now hummed with life. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and Zoe's laughter carried into the night like a promise. The road ahead would still hold uneasy moments, but as I watched her move between the people who loved her, my parents among them now, I felt the first real ease in years. And in that small, glowing yard, surrounded by light and forgiveness, it finally felt like family. The morning after Zoe's birthday, the house was still. Sunlight slipped through the blinds in long, pale bands, catching the faint shimmer of confetti left on the kitchen floor. The air carried a trace of vanilla frosting, and candle smoke evidence of laughter that had finally settled into peace. For once, there was no tension waiting behind the quiet. Only calm. Michael was already outside, untangling the last of the string lights from the fence. His movements were unhurried, the kind of steady rhythm you fall into when you've come through something hard and know it's behind you. I stood at the sink, rinsing mugs, letting the warm water run over my hands. Zoe's new bracelet caught the light beside me on the counter, gleaming softly against the morning sun. Zoe came in a few minutes later, hair still tousled from sleep, one of Michael's flannel shirts hanging loosely over her jeans. She poured herself coffee with a confidence that used to live only in other people's homes. "Grandma called," she said. She and Grandpa made it home safe. She said she hasn't seen Mom smile that much in years. I smiled, rinsing another mug. Maybe she remembered how. Zoe leaned against the counter, sipping carefully. "You think it'll stay like this? Peaceful?" I turned toward her, drying my hands on a towel. "Peace doesn't stay on its own," I said. "You have to keep choosing it." She nodded thoughtfully, her eyes tracing the light moving across the floorboards. "Then I'll keep choosing it," she said quietly. It had been 3 months since the Christmas confrontation, 2 since the dinner, where everything unspoken finally surfaced. In that time, small signs of change began to appear. My father started sending Zoe postcards from his business trips, handwritten notes about the cities he visited, small sketches of landmarks in the corners. My mother called every Sunday afternoon, her voice soft, uncertain, but trying. And Melissa, still tentative, had shown up early to help decorate for the birthday party, her hands shaking slightly as she tied ribbons to chairs. That morning, I found one of her notes tucked beneath a serving tray. "I'm still learning how to be a better sister. Thank you for not giving up on me." After breakfast, Zoe left for her debate competition, her bag slung over one shoulder, and confidence steady in her step. Michael followed her out, promising to bring coffee on his way back. The house fell into the kind of silence that lets you hear your own breathing. I walked through each room, picking up cups, folding blankets, and marveling at how ordinary peace could look. Just sunlight, still air, and the sound of wind moving through trees. By noon, I was in the garden, trimming the lavender that had survived winter. The air was cool, clean, and filled with birdsong. A car pulled up quietly out front. I straightened shears in hand and saw my mother step out. No preamble, no phone call. Just her standing there, with her hair loose, a soft cardigan over her shoulders, and a bakery box balanced carefully in her hands. She walked toward me slowly, her heels pressing into the damp earth. "I brought lemon cake," she said. "The kind you liked as a girl." I smiled faintly. "You never did like to call first." She gave a small, nervous laugh. "I thought if I gave you warning, you might tell me not to come." We stood there for a moment, the breeze moving between us. Then I nodded toward the porch. "Come in. It's too nice to stand outside pretending it isn't awkward." Inside, I made tea while she set the cake on the table. The kitchen smelled like lemons and soap. She watched me quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about that night," she said finally. "About how long I let appearances dictate who I loved and how." She paused, voice trembling slightly. "You were right to protect her. I was wrong to make you feel you had to." The words were soft, but they landed deep. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured tea into her cup, the steam curling between us like something alive. "She's doing well," I said after a moment. "She's happy." "I can see that," she said. "You both seem lighter." She looked down at her hands. "I want to earn my place in her life. Slowly, properly this time." I met her eyes and nodded. "Then start by showing up. That's all she's ever wanted. We talked until the tea turned cold about things that didn't hurt flowers, recipes, the quiet joy of ordinary days. Before she left, she touched my arm lightly. "Thank you for not shutting me out," she said. "I don't deserve grace, but I'll spend the rest of my days learning how to return it." After she drove off, the sky began to turn gold at the edges. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain from somewhere far off. I sat on the porch steps with a slice of lemon cake, listening to the leaves rustle. For the first time in years, I felt the kind of tired that comes from peace, not from pain. A few weeks later, Zoe won her regional debate championship. We drove 3 hours to watch her final round, sitting shoulder to shoulder in the school auditorium. When they called her name, the applause rolled through the room like a tide. My parents were there too, my mother clapping with tears in her eyes, my father standing beside her, awkward but proud. Afterward, Zoe walked off the stage holding her trophy, the bracelet on her wrist flashing in the lights. She came straight to us, arms wide, eyes bright. "We did it," she said. Her words made me laugh because she still hadn't realized how much of her victory was hers alone. That night back home, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with her debate notes scattered around her. "What are you writing?" I asked. She smiled. "My college essay," she said. "I want to tell the story of how family isn't just where you come from. It's what you build when people finally see you." The pride that rose in me was quiet but overwhelming. "That's a good story," I said. "Tell it exactly like that." Spring slipped into summer. The lavender bloomed again, brighter than before. Family dinners became routine, small, imperfect, but real. Melissa visited with her husband and their new baby, her laughter softer, less defensive. My parents came too, bringing pies, staying late enough to help with dishes. And every time they left, I noticed my mother hugging Zoe just a little longer. By August, Zoe had chosen her college, Oregon State, close enough for weekend visits, but far enough to feel like the world was opening. We helped her pack, folding years of memories into boxes labeled with careful handwriting. The night before she left, she stood in her empty room looking around. "You think they'll be okay?" she asked. "They're learning," I said. "So are we." She smiled, leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thank you for never letting me doubt who I am." When the moving truck pulled away the next morning, the street was lined with sunlight. Michael slipped his arm around me as we watched her wave from the passenger seat. The bracelet on her wrist caught the light again, a silver flicker fading down the road. The house felt larger after she left, but not empty. Her presence lingered in every corner, books on the shelf, a jacket draped over a chair, laughter caught between the walls. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was gentle like an exhale after a long-held breath. That evening, I walked out to the garden. The air was soft and warm, the sky painted in layers of rose and amber. I looked toward the porch where my mother had once stood holding a box of cake and regret, and thought about how far we'd come. Family, I realized, was never meant to be a fixed shape. It grows, bends, and sometimes breaks before finding its true form. As the sun sank behind the trees, the wind carried the faintest trace of lavender. I closed my eyes and let the peace settle over me, earned steady and finally mine. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we stop carrying them. If this story touched you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever fought for peace instead of revenge, I'd love to hear how it changed you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength and second chances.